Today I have a new Leica M-mount lens for you, and it's affordable. Stay tuned. Hello, Matt here. Yes, a new lens for you today. This amazing little lens was kindly sent to me by the guys at Gear, who are the main distributors for brands like 7Artisans and then things like Godox and quite a few other popular brands. There you go. I can't normally show that with my vintage lenses because I don't normally have the box. A really nice 7Artisans case or lens pouch. So in this video I'm going to tell you all you need to know about the 7Artisans 35mm f5.6 Leica M-mount lens. And it even does this, watch. How cool is that? So firstly, sorry there was no video yesterday. The reason there was no video over the weekend is because I was out testing this lens, so I could then make this video. The sun came out, so I couldn't resist going out to my bike and taking a few photos. I'll quickly cover the lens spec, then we'll look at some example photos, and then finally we'll finish with pros and cons of this lens and whether it could be right for you. So first things first, the size of this lens is fantastic. Just look at how small this lens is. And this is not really collapsed as such like with many of my vintage lenses. This lens does not collapse. What it does have is a built-in lens cap. So as you open the lens, which I think is a really nice design, and it's really good for any of you that potentially lose your lens caps. This is quite a strange lens in that it is a fixed f5.6 aperture, so minimum f5.6, maximum f5.6, and also it is a scale focus or zone focus lens, meaning it is not rangefinder coupled. So if you look through your Leica viewfinder and adjust the distance, you're not seeing anything through the viewfinder. That's also a bit of a negative if you are a Leica M shooter, especially if you use Leica M film cameras or Leica M mount film cameras, whether it's the Leica M240 or something like the Leica CL, which is also Leica M mount, but this is a film body. I'll come on to this in a second. So when it comes to focusing, you have a lever on the side, and as you move the lever, the lens obviously comes out of the housing. If you can see, you have one kind of stop as you get to infinity, and then the rest, there's no kind of clicks or anything all the way through to 0.3 meters. This makes it quite difficult to judge when you're trying to guesstimate your distance, how far you've set on the lens, because as you can see, there's very little markings between 0.5 meters and infinity. So like, it's difficult to tell if you're at 1 meter, 1.5 meters, 2 meters, 3 meters. And that does make the focusing a little bit more difficult if you're trying to, as I say, zone focus or scale focus. The good news is if you're using a Leica M240 or say a Leica M10, you're obviously going to have your live view on the back of the camera. And if, like me, a EVF on the top of the camera as a second option. Obviously, when you're using an EVF or the live view, you can see clearly to both compose and accurately focus all of your images. For that reason, even at this stage in the video, I'd say this lens is better suited for cameras with live view, or if you're using film cameras like the little Leica CL, this is better when you're shooting at infinity or at 0.3 meters. I can share a little tip with you that I found useful. I was trying to gauge how far 0.3 meters was, so when I shot it on film, I could judge the distance without obviously being able to see through the viewfinder. And what I found is if you use your hand and then measure the distance from the front of the lens to your subject, for me it was kind of my hand's width at full extension and then maybe a little bit extra. And then by testing that on the live view, that was accurate at 0.3 meters. So then that meant I could go out with my film camera and shoot at 0.3 meters, do my same little hand trick, and then hey presto, hopefully the photos will be sharp. I've not yet developed the film yet, so rather than delay the video, I'll post those onto social media at a later date when I do develop the film photos shot with this lens. So with that said, this lens is slightly different for like M mount in that it can focus as close as 0.3 meters. I'll come on to that a bit more in a second. Before we look at the photos, let's have a closer look at the lens. As I say, this is the Leica M mount version. It's all metal and glass. And from reading up, this is the WEN logo on the top, the red logo. And despite the look of it, it's quite a weighty lens. It gives you some confidence that it is metal and glass. It feels more like the build of, say, a Voigtlander lens or a Leica lens in terms of the weight. The lens optical formula is 5 elements in 4 groups, and it has a weight of 128 grams, which is 4.5 ounces. Now for you Leica CL shooters, we recently reviewed the Leica Elmarit TL 18mm, which is a small lens and a light lens. Here's a side-by-side comparison, just for those of you who have got the 18mm lens and think this is small, this is even smaller. The Elmarit is a lot lighter, but in terms of size, the 7Artisans is smaller. I'm sure you can tell it's small, but in terms of thickness, it's less than 2 centimeters deep, 21.75 millimeters. And for completeness, here it is set up on the Leica CL film camera. This is the smallest setup I could make for shooting film with the cameras that I own. And for any of you kind of thinking, yes, but the Leica CL doesn't have a 35mm frame line, that's correct. I was using the 40mm frame line and just going a little bit wider to estimate 35mm. And then obviously you cannot use your rangefinder for focusing, so I just scale focused all the images. And on that note, let's look at photos. So yesterday we actually had some blue sky weather, so I took my Leica M240, the 7Artisans 35mm f5.6 in a rucksack, and then cycled to my local area to try and find some photos to try and get creative and to test the lens in kind of different scenarios. The photos you're about to see are all Leica M240 JPEGs shot in the vivid colour film mode, which helps give a more saturated look to all the images. Also, I do apologise in advance. I don't normally shoot the M240 with the lenses stopped down. For that reason, I never clean the camera sensor, and you can really see it in these images all the dust speck. So I need to probably clean the sensor after this video, and apologise in advance for all the dust in these images. All the photos are in-camera JPEGs with no editing to give a true representation of what the lens can do. I normally shoot black and white, so when I do shoot colour, I shoot colour, like real colour, as in saturated, vibrant. That's the kind of photos I go for if I do shoot colour. So with that said, let's bring up some photos. So first up, lens flare. Because the lens protrudes, depending on how the light catches the front element of the lens, you can get different lens flare as seen in these daffodil photos. I could quite easily tilt the lens to have no flare by checking on the LCD, but I was trying to show the kind of worst case scenario of the flare that you can get. Okay, next we have colour. Here I was using my bike obviously as a prop, something to focus on, and then playing with the colours, the greens, the reds, the blues. And to my eyes the colours seem really rich and vibrant, despite the fact that I increased the saturation by using the preset. I love red and blue, so I was playing the kind of the red and blues and just kind of do various test shots to see what the lens could do. Red and blue seemed to be the theme for yesterday. Okay, what about purple fringing? You can see here on the right hand side of the images you get minor purple fringing, which I've only really ever seen on the Voigtlander 15mm super wide Helia version 1 and 2. It seems less of an effect on the left hand side. And then this image also shows you the vignetting. This lens vignettes very heavily, but it is a look that I tend to go for because to my eyes it helps create a more kind of artistic, less perfect photo. What about sun stars? Because this lens is a fixed 5.6 lens, there is no sun stars from this lens. This is my attempt at a sun star. What about bokeh? It is possible to get bokeh at f5.6, so here I'll focus on the distance and I'm managing to get some kind of slight bokeh up close as this runner accidentally runs past. And then now I'm focusing on the foreground at 0.3 meters to say 0.5 meters to see the effect of the background blur and any kind of bokeh. This lens does have much nicer separation than I would expect from a fixed 5.6 lens, due to the fact that it can focus as close as 0.3 meters. As you can see from my bike tire example here, the sharpness is pretty good and it is sharp in the center. The sharpness decreases as you get towards the edge of the frame and the corners are kind of soft and a bit mushy, but that's largely hidden by the heavy vignetting. The focus is not perfect on some of these photos because I was focusing via the LCD in bright conditions and it's kind of sometimes a bit difficult to see. I should have used my EVF if I wanted to really nail the sharpness. What about for black and white? As a black and white shooter, I think this lens is excellent because you won't have any issues with purple fringing, and to my eyes the lens has nice contrast. And what about portraits? I know you probably thought you had the wrong channel for the last series of images, But yes, I did manage to take 2 photos with this lens in the studio. The first photo is a JPEG, and you can see it is still nice and sharp and kind of sharp enough for my needs as a female portrait photographer. And then the second photo, again of Harriet, is a DNG file converted with one of my Mr. Leica black and white presets. And even with no additional sharpening, it does make for a apparent sharp image, as you can see here from the detail on Harriet's skin and hair. So after using the lens, I managed to make a list of pros and cons of what I thought were the strengths and weaknesses of this lens. In terms of advantages of why I would get this lens, I would say it is the super flat compact design, where it's very flush to the camera. The close focus ability of 0.3 meters was amazing. Absolutely love that feature. As a Leica M shooter, you'll know most of our lenses are limited to a close focus distance of 0.7 meters, which is the distance our rangefinders work at. So to have a lens that focuses at 0.3 meters, it's like using an SLR lens on a rangefinder, but with the benefit of the lens being smaller than rangefinder lenses. You're not going to find an SLR lens plus adapter that will fit on an M240 as small as this, I think. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. For me, the lens is sharp enough for my use. It has good contrast. You don't need a lens cap, and it is very competitively priced. I'm coming on to price, so stay with me. In terms of cons, the biggest con of this lens, it is not rangefinder coupled. To have a lens designed for the Leica M mount, which is not then coupled to the rangefinder, is a real kind of bummer. 7Artisans, if you're listening, please make a rangefinder coupled version of this lens where it couples from 0.7 meters to infinity, and then have a kind of stop so that we know when it is at 0.7 meters. You see this kind of stop feature on the vintage Nikkor LTM lens 50mm f2, where it will focus closer than the rangefinder coupling, but it tells you when you are doing so. Thereby you're not misfocusing. So please rangefinder couple the next version of your lens. Another negative for me is if you're shooting film, f5.6 is not ideal in many situations. I was out shooting ISO 100 film, and I had to shoot all the film ISO 400 because the sun didn't come out as promised, and then there just wasn't enough light for an f5.6 fixed lens. I didn't like the lack of clicks on the distance scale because I found it very difficult to guesstimate 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, and so on. The purple fringing on the right hand side of the photo will be an issue for anybody shooting full frame, such as the Leica M240. Unless you're shooting black and white. If you shoot black and white, you have no problems. This lens will flare in certain situations. It's not a problem if you're using your EVF or live view, because you can adjust your angle to try to minimize the flare, but if you're shooting film, this could be an issue. The images are soft in the corners with heavy vignetting. That may be a problem to some of you that like kind of sharp edge-to-edge photos. Personally, it's not a problem for me because I tend to shoot portraits, so only really the center sharpness is important for myself. And lastly, the design of this lens means there is no filter thread, so you cannot use color filters if you're crazy enough like me to shoot this lens on a film body. Ideally, I would have shot with a yellow filter yesterday on black and white film if I could have attached the filter to the lens. Okay, so what about price, I hear you ask? The good news is this lens is listed on Amazon, both in the UK and the US. In the UK, it's listing for £199 for Leica M mount, and in the US, it's listing for $199 for Leica M mount. In terms of colours, there is good news. You may have noticed that my lens is gold and silver, and gold may not be to your taste, as it isn't really for my taste. There is also a black lens with a gold edge, which potentially you may like. But also there's more standard colours with a silver lens with a black edge, which may look good if you've got a silver Leica M240 like myself, or silver M10. Or they have an all black lens, which I think looks fantastic. The all black version of this lens looks really classy and the best of the bunch to my eyes. And I think this will look really stunning on a black M10 or a black M240. Really nice and much more professional looking to my taste. Now if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll know that I use the Leica M240, but also the Leica CL. So you may be wondering, is it worth getting this lens for your Leica CL? With that said, you might be a Fuji shooter or a Sony shooter, and I have good news for all of you mentioned. From looking on Amazon, I noticed the lens is available in Canon EOS M mount for the mirrorless bodies, in Sony E mount for obviously the popular Sony cameras, in Leica L mount, which means you can get a lens to fit directly onto your Leica CL or SL or SL2 without needing the M mount adapter, making for a much smaller setup. And finally, this lens is also available for the Nikon Z mirrorless cameras. I think if you shoot with any crop sensor camera such as Fuji's or the Leica CL, you'll have no problems with the purple fringing, and it should make for a really compact setup for you. I've not tried this lens on a Fuji sensor, Sony sensor, Canon sensor or Nikon sensor, so I cannot tell you if you can have the purple fringing and the heavy vignetting as I've experienced with the Leica M240. I would expect the vignetting to be standard across most camera sensors, but you may find you have less or even more purple fringing with your camera sensor combined with this lens. So finally, what is my verdict? Would I recommend the 7Artisans 35mm f5.6 lens? I think if you're like me and you like a small compact lens with pretty good image quality and the ability to get creative, this is a very creative lens. The fact that the heavy vignetting and kind of less perfect look may help to make a more creative image, and I found the 0.3 close focus particularly useful for getting creative. I cannot think of a single rangefinder lens I own which would have given me the ability to get that close to the floor for those runner photos that I did yesterday. So pat on the back to 7Artisans. For the price and for the size, I think it's a good lens to have in your lens kit. If you shoot with a Leica to get perfect images, you may be better at looking at more perfect lenses, but if you're more of a creative soul, perhaps like myself, I enjoy playing with lenses, but I like to create. I like the imperfections that you can achieve by either shooting film or by using vintage lenses on a modern sensor, or in this case, a modern lens on a modern sensor. Two alternatives I can give you if you're looking for a small 35mm for like an M mount. The first I'd say is the Voigtlander Color 35mm f2.5. It is slightly larger than the 7Artisans and it is very slightly heavier, but the scope is also 2 times the price. The advantage of the Color similar size, but it is rangefinder coupled and it has a working aperture from f2.5 to f22. So if you're looking for more perfect and still a small size, perhaps look at the Voigtlander. And then if you want an even cheaper lens, you could look at something like the Jupiter 12 35mm f2.8. The Jupiter 12 is a bigger lens, but it's a lighter lens. This lens is not perfect for crop sensor cameras because the large rear element will hit the inside of your camera. I'll do a full review of this at a later date. But this is a cheap option if you're just looking for a cheap 35mm. Less than £100 or less than $100 for a Jupiter 12. Roughly £400 or $450 for a Scope R. Or £200 or $200 for a 7Artisans. Each of these lenses have their pros and cons, so it's personal choice. One final note to 7Artisans: if you make a second version of this lens, I found the lens cap is often half open, half closed where it's been knocked. It would be better to put a lock so it locks into place to stop it accidentally opening kind of in transit. That's all I have for you for this video. A big thanks to Pergear for sending me this lens. And I will include a link to their website below if you do want to check out more of their products. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and feel free to subscribe so not to miss future videos. Finally, as always, a big thanks to my patrons. I'm back soon in a few days. Bye.